Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday. It is Wow Wednesday. Thank you for bearing with me these past couple of weeks, or the weeks I haven't been able to get a video done. I have to keep life balanced, and that's how it goes sometimes. But I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited to share with you some ideas from the Word that I have been learning when it comes to practicing, I guess you would say, practicing our faith in action. So again, I come on here every week to hopefully encourage you and inspire you just as the body of believers, but especially for moms of faith. My desire is to speak to you, speak to your hearts, because I'm also a mom, I'm a believer, and so I really want to help guide us in this area of getting healthier in our spirit, soul, and body. So that's why I'm here. I see some people hopping on. Say hi. Let me know who's here. If these thoughts resonate with you, drop me an emoji and tell me, yes, that makes sense. I'd love to see more interaction in these videos. I really would like to know what you think, if it's applicable to you, how it helps you, all of those things. So, hey everybody who's jumping on. I'm going to go ahead and get going. This is something that God has been working in me for a while, and I'm sure I could share it for a long time, but I'm trying to keep it short as I can, so that you guys can get to the rest of your day, or it's not a very long video, so you don't have to stay here for very long. But you know, if you want longer videos, that's totally fine. Just let me know. But anyways, I want to talk about this idea behind the fact that faith equals action, or faith requires movement. This is something that I've been thinking about for a while. God has really been working in me what this looks like for my own life, and I just want to read in James. I had it marked and then I pulled it out. James chapter 2, and I want to read from verse 14. Find it. Oh, I'm in 1 Peter. That's not going to help me. All right, back to James. And I just looked my Bible. Okay, here we go. James 2, verse 14 says, "What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say that you have faith, but you don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, 'Goodbye and have a good day, stay warm and eat well,' but then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do?" So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Now someone may argue, some people have faith, others have good deeds. But I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I will show you my faith by my good deeds. You say you have faith, for you believe there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? So this is where I've, been thinking about this idea of faith equals action. And I'm sure we've heard other people talk about this before from a spiritual aspect. And so I still want to speak about it from a spiritual aspect, but I also want to speak about it from a physical aspect, a physical position of where our body and our mind needs to be in order for these things to happen. So I really believe that there are certain positions or movements that we are called to physically to show our spiritual action in faith. And this is something that God's been teaching me. I also believe that these are daily positions that we need to be putting ourselves in, daily positions of movement that we need to be putting ourselves in, that we're called to. And I wanted to just touch on why. Why do I think this? I've been studying the Old Testament for the past several months and have come across just more revelation in my entire life that I ever have in the Old Testament. Probably just in relation to where I'm at spiritually with my relationship with God. But I've been reading in Joshua, and I've just kind of been stuck there the first few chapters, talking about the different battles that Joshua went through, the Israelites went through to get the promised land. God had always promised them the promised land, but they still had to take the promised land. They still had to fight for the promised land. And I believe that this is true today for ourselves as well. And I've heard other people talk about this before, and I think that as a culture of believers, we need to wrap our minds around the fact that God has so many promises for us. He has a promised land for us. Yes, our home is in heaven, but we can gain some of that promised land here on earth. Like, I think that's something that we don't really understand. This is something that I've been putting myself under authority in my home church, where that's what we've been diving into, what we've been teaching ourselves, what scripture looks like and how to do this in life. And so we are called, and we've been given a promised land. Every one of us, every single one of us. And again, I'm speaking to moms, but I'm speaking to all of us as believers. But for moms, I think this is really important for us to understand that we still have a position to play. We still have a role, and we still have a promised land to take, right? Sometimes I think we forget that. So the thing is we have to be willing to take the promised land. We have to still be willing to put in the time, to put in the effort. And these battles that Joshua and the Israelites were going through, there were different ways that they fought these different battles. And so I want to kind of share some of that, what I've learned. But I just wanted to definitely reiterate that I haven't figured this out completely in my own life. It's a journey, it's a process. I'm learning it. And so I just want to help pass on some of this revelation of what I feel like God has shown me in my own life and He's asked me to do in my own life. So today I want to talk about the first position that I believe God calls us to when it comes to taking the promised land in our life. And I think this is the most important one, and it's often the one that we oversee, we don't do, basically. We miss it. And I have been guilty of this. This is something I'm still working on in my life. It's a practice that I'm still trying to figure out how to put into play in my life. But I think as moms especially, or as believers especially, we've got to figure this out. Because in order for us to take the promised land, we have to put ourselves in this first position in order for anything else to go well. So stay with me to the end. I have my notes here, so hopefully I won't ramble, but if this makes sense to you as I'm going through these things, just drop me an emoji, let me know how you feel about it. Any comments or questions, for sure, also put this in the comments. So I want to read Joshua 5:13 through 15, and I kind of alluded to this in one of my earlier posts a few weeks ago. But this really stood out to me when I was thinking about the different positions that we are supposed to be putting ourselves in when it comes to our faith. So, hey Lauren, thanks for waving. So Joshua 5 verses 13 through 15 says, and let's see, in context, the Israelites were getting ready to take Jericho. They had come across the Jordan River. They had done that. They were camped. They were getting ready to go into battle to take the promised land of Jericho. And so it says in verse 13, when Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, "Are you friend or foe?" At this point, he knows he's in enemy territory, even though this is his promised land. He still has to take it, but he needs to know who this person is. And this person says, "Neither one," he replied. "I am the commander of the Lord's army." At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. "I am at your command," Joshua said. "What do you want your servant to do?" If you've ever watched VeggieTales, those of you who have, there is a story about, I believe it's Joshua, I'm not for sure, but Larry the Cucumber is playing Joshua, and he literally like falls flat on his face. It's hilarious. Anyways, that's what it makes me think of when I read this verse. And so verse 15 says, the commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did as he was told. So as I was reading this is kind of where this idea came from. And there are other passages, obviously, that I've read in my life where there are certain positions physically that sometimes we need to be in. And so the first position I believe we are called to is surrender. The first position I believe we're called to is surrender. It might not necessarily be physically laying flat on the floor, but sometimes it actually is. And so I think that's important. But I think more so, the first position of surrender is more so spiritually, more so in our mind, right? And so I want to talk about, I believe there are 3 different whys that I see this being important to focus on, and 3 hows to practicing this position of surrender. I'm only going to talk about the first one today because I don't want to take too much of your time. And so the first why I believe it's important to understand this position of surrender is in the first verse 13. It's talking about how, Joshua, once he figured out who this person was, who was the commander of the Lord's army, he fell flat on his face. And I believe that, it says in that verse that he fell on his face with reverence. Like Joshua understood the position of lordship that he was under in the presence of the leader of the Lord's army. Like he understood where he stood. He understood the position of authority that he was still under. He was the leader of the Israelites. He was going to lead them into the promised land, but he still understood that he was under authority, under the Lord's authority. And I think this is important. This is something that I really haven't understood and have started to practice in my life, except for probably the last 5 or 6 years, maybe even less. Really understanding what this means. And so I believe that the first thing we need to do is to take our promised land. The first thing we need to do to take our promised land is to recognize that God asks us to revere him. He asks us to put ourselves under his lordship. And I'm going to get into this just a little bit more, but, lordship means just giving him control. Lordship means being aware that he's got it. He knows best. It's not always this, he's, this like God who wants to, strike you down the minute you do something bad. It's like God is our father, right? If you think of God as our father, he disciplines us for certain reasons, right? We discipline our kids because they're doing things they shouldn't do. It's understanding that. It's understanding that being under his lordship means you got it, God. I can trust you. I understand that you know best. And so it means giving him control. That's what I really think, being under his lordship means. So, hey Leah, hey Jody. So that's the first position and the first why I believe it's so important that we put ourselves in this position of surrender. Again, it can be, there have been days where I need to physically put myself in a position face down on the floor. There's just something about it where you give up. You put yourself in a bodily position. And it works. You're just saying, you've got it. I understand you've got it. But I think a lot of times it just means we have to recognize that he's got control. We have to let him have control. So the first how to do this is probably something that as moms, when I say this and when I think about it, I'm like, this is so hard. How am I supposed to do this? Is the first how to doing this, to putting ourselves in a position of surrender, is we have to recognize that it requires us to be still. This is something that us as moms, gosh, maybe even as women, I don't know, men, if you struggle with this, let us know. But this is hard. It's really hard to put yourself in a position of stillness. But this is something that God has been teaching me probably the last 2 or 3 years. Just a short story about me. I used to be on the worship team at my church, and loved it. I was on the worship team for 5 years. But I've always had this like underlying knowledge of the fact that being on the worship team on the stage is not something that I will probably always do. And this is something that, there were times in my life where I felt like God was maybe asking me to step out of it, and I didn't, and I said no. You don't ever want to tell God no. Let's just put it that way. But he literally, there was just some things that happened in my heart, and it was just revealed to me a couple years ago that I was supposed to step down from being on the worship team. And while I have some talent, I wouldn't say that I'm an amazing singer, but I'm a great harmonizer. That's my role. But I just felt like God was asking me to step down. And so while I did, not very happily, no one else asked me to, I just knew God told me to do it. I just knew he asked me to do it. I put myself in a lower place positionally because God had asked me to. And while that was hard, the reason behind it was because he wanted me to slow my life down. I'm that person that likes to do so many things. Like, I have so many hobbies, and God really taught me in that time that it's not that I don't have talent. It's not that I can't handle the stage. It's that I have something better for you to do. I have something more for you. And I've seen God work in some of the other leaders that were on the worship team, and they've grown so much. Not necessarily because I stepped down, but just like I've seen the thing happen where, because I put myself in a position of surrender, I was obedient, and I did that. He's given me a different role to play that is bigger than I could have ever imagined. And if I wouldn't have put myself in that position of surrender, I don't think I would be where I am today, and I wouldn't be able to thrive in a different way, in a better way, in a way that God knew I needed. So that's just an example of something that's happened in my life where, even though begrudgingly at first I did it, I've learned that this also means that in my daily life, I need to be putting myself in a place of being still. I think one of the reasons behind this too is there's a verse in Exodus 14 through chapter 14, 13 through 14, and it says, "But Moses told the people, 'Don't be afraid. Stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm.'" And I think when we put ourselves in a position of surrender, we can see that better. We can stop. We can recognize he's Lord. He understands. He's got this. He's fighting for us. And so we have to take the time to be still. Recognizing him as Lord, it means that you trust him to help you. And so that's what I believe from this verse in Exodus, where Moses was like, "Don't be afraid, stand still, let the Lord do it. Let the Lord do it." We have to sit still. We have to be still. What's funny is I actually got a tattoo probably 2 years ago because I felt the Lord calling me to this. I felt the Lord saying, "You need to be more still. You need to be more still. You need to seek me." And so it's an arrow, and it says, "Be still and seek me first." So what's really been interesting is how God has actually taken that and made me learn that, which has been awesome. But it's been kind of a hard thing to learn. And so but I truly believe that the more we spend time in the Word, the more that we sit still, it will help us understand that He's in control. The thing that's hard about this, and I'm going to talk about the other two things that I think go along with this, but I think this is the most important thing to understand first. You have to do this first. As a mom, as a believer, we have to stop. We have to take time daily, even if it's just 10 minutes. If it's 10 minutes in the Word and being silent, listening. It just has to be a priority. And I'm learning this, and I'm still trying to figure out how to put this into practice, but we have to find the time to do this. And it's so good for your soul. It's so good for your mind. Just start with 10 minutes. 10 minutes of quiet. Read a Bible verse. Read the verse of the day. Read a few verses, whatever it is. But learn to be still in the presence of the Lord. Learn to be still and put yourself in a position of surrender. So next week I will talk about the other two things that I believe help us understand this position of surrender. But for now, I just wanted to leave you with this thought. When it comes to understanding this position, do you have reverence for the position of lordship that God is to you in your life? Are you willing to take that position of reverence, of surrender in your own life? And, only you can say that, only you can look at your life, but your action is what tells you that story in your own life. The movement that you have in your life is what's telling you that story of whether or not you're willing to sit still and put yourself in a position of surrender. So that's all I have for you guys today on this Wow Wednesday. Thanks to everybody who's waving. Hey, Randy. You guys have a great Wednesday. I'll see you guys later.